YouTube, so you may hear me just talking about random things, random events, which I try to keep relatively interesting to the degree that I can. We are waiting for people to join. It is the top of the hour right now, 11 o'clock a.m. U.S. East Coast time on September 30th. I will share a little window of something that is relevant for me right now. And that was a hurricane. So for any who may be on the line, let me see if there's anybody here yet. Yes, I see Stefan, Bethany, Preeti. Thank you guys for joining. We'll give it a few minutes before others, before I dive into sort of the Q&A, just give it a few minutes. It's 11 o'clock right now, the top of the hour. But I was just sharing some stories about, or about to share some stories about the recent events here in Florida. So I live in Florida. I recently moved here from Texas. Where I live is on the right-hand side of this diagram under Melbourne. It's just kind of cut off there. But got very, very, very lucky here. The eye of the storm did actually go straight over my city. But by the time it did, it had weakened to a Category 1. And we'd actually got incredibly, incredibly lucky being in the eye of the storm. We got very, very little rain. It was surreal. It was obviously very, very windy. But most of the rain was to the west, as you can see here, and it ended up being to the north as well. Quite obviously down in the southwest part of the state in Fort Myers, Sanibel, Captiva, Fort Myers Beach, Naples, just complete destruction. Some of the photos I'm seeing are just heartbreaking. It's one of the more beautiful places in the world that I've been. And yeah, it's not going to be easy for folks down there. But for me, got really lucky. There's tons of tree branches all over my yard. I will be spending all weekend being useful and cleaning up the branches. But Florida's in a tough spot right now. So I got lucky. People across the street from me literally have no power right now and haven't for days. And on my side of the street, we're fine. So I can be sitting here talking about MDM and data governance and data strategy while people across the street have no power and no refrigeration. And well, it's not quite true because we're running extension cords across the street, but across the entire state, there are people in really, really, really bad way. So my heart obviously goes out to them. So that's kind of the news of the day for me while we're waiting for people to join. Let's see how many we've got. We started Bethany, Jeff, Stefan, Preeti. Why don't we jump into it? So guys, there are a few different ways that you can ask questions. One is to just put a question in the chat. Another is to go to the Q&A portion on the right-hand side of your screen there, where you can ask a question there. You can actually raise your hand if you would like to be on the stage here with me and share your video with me. You obviously don't have to. Most of the time, people have just been asking questions through the Q&A panel via text. So if you've got questions, go ahead and submit those now, and we can. I'll follow up. I don't see anything in the chat yet. So for anybody that does have questions, please go ahead, fire them into the chat or raise your hand. And my handy producer today, Ben, will move you onto the stage and we can have a conversation on video. I don't see any questions yet. Oh, Stefan with a video question. Okay, prove. There he is. Hi.
Yeah, I thought maybe it's good when I just ask you some questions. Maybe I still introduce myself because
Please.
I know you, but you don't know me. I worked 25 years with SAP and a consultant in the automotive industry. There's a certain initiative, Malcolm, and this has certain tasks, i.e. the golden record. Yeah. So companies like BMW, Mercedes, all the big guys, they decided, because they have so much overlapping supplier base, they have 80% overlapping supplier base, why we should do all the master data management and master data qualification by ourselves, why we do not outsource that, and then we do it all together. Okay, so in this case, the golden record process, the vision, that there's a service like you provide, that's my assumption, that you bring in certain data and a certain structure, and based on that, there is a technology, there is knowledge, there's content, to convert the incoming data into a better quality base on a first time right base, start there, make it easy, first time right, and then agree that the outcome of that, functionality of that process is accepted. So I'm not going and knock at the door to Dun & Bradstreet solely, and say, okay, this is maybe a little bit more. So and what I'm doing, I'm screening a little bit the world, and based on this screening, I found the one or the other company who voice or intent, to help customers in this exercise. And I listened to you or to your sessions, and I was reading a lot of documents and all that. And then I said, maybe it makes sense to raise two questions. I have only two. I don't want to boil the ocean here because I'm just one member of this. Just two.
Okay.
Which are interesting. The one is how the golden record process really works. That's a question number one. How to secure that a data is right related to certain attributes a data record might have. And the second question is, and that's a totally different question, how long it take you to convince a client to go for Profisee. The one is a technology, architectural question,
Yep.
And the other one is more a go-to-market question. I listened that the implementation time is short.
Yes. It can be.
Yeah, yes. Don't oversell it.
I got to pay the bills, Stefan. But yeah, okay.
And I'm coming I'm a former developer. I was a general manager at IBM, initially.
Oh, okay.
And was responsible for all application development programs of IBM.
I was an IBM customer for a long time.
I was part of the architecture team. I know SAP MDM by heart. I know a lot of things, but I'm not talking about me. So I just want to understand also from an SAP customer community, not only from a sole Microsoft customer community, maybe not solely mid-market or high mid-market range clients. Would be interesting for me, maybe not outside of the chat. We can also have another call if you would like. I would be very interested to have a continuation on that. But these two things are for me fundamental.
Yes.
To discuss, do we have the same understanding of the golden record process? It's number one. And number two, because the projects, this in IT takes forever sometimes, takes forever. It is not a walk in the park, how you made it to convince clients to go for Profisee, so that you have maybe a 2-year sales cycle and then you have a 3 months implementation cycle.
So let's dive into it. So question number one, the creation of a gold master record, and one of my dear friends, the data whisperer, Mr. Scott Taylor, every time he hears that, he would say, "Ooh, gold master, that sounds expensive." It's because it's gold, and it can be. When we're talking about creating a single gold master record, now let's separate data into two types of data. One is reference data, and the other is everything else. Okay. So when it comes to creating a gold master record in your space, now through the lens of automotive, through the lens of manufacturing, through the lens of very, very large manufacturers, perspective here matters. It's very important. The perspective is very important, because in the manufacturing space, particularly in automotive, most people in that world can accept the notion of one record for every material, every item, every customer, every supplier, because in that space, in the automotive space or in the manufacturing space generally, that is an industry built on precision. It is an industry built on there can only be one answer to the question of what is this item description or what is this material description, right? In the manufacturing world, and particularly also in the SAP world, I will say, there's a general consensus that most master data aligns well to what we would call reference data, a single source of truth, a generally agreed upon source of truth for material or item or part, right, in the manufacturing space. And in the automotive world, there are data consortiums that exist to create and manage standards related to parts, right? So where multiple companies can actually get together and agree, this is how we describe a brake pad, or this is how we describe a certain part that is used across multiple manufacturing processes, not just BMW, but maybe Saab, maybe Volvo, maybe multiple manufacturers would all be agreeing on a single version, a single definition of a given piece of master data. To me, that aligns well to the notion of reference data. Now, if you get outside the manufacturing space, if you get into the world of B2C consumer packaged goods, you are making anything, clothing, you're making something that you're selling. And in that world, often the notion of MDM is far more flexible, where you can have different definitions of customers. You could even have different definitions of suppliers, right? So in your world, in the world of automotive and the world of SAP, it tends to align very, very closely to the manufacturing space, which tends to align very nicely to more of a single version of the truth approach. How do you create a single version of the truth? The answer to that question is by having very precise and very exact policies and procedures related to the definition of a master data object, customer, supplier, asset, material, item, where you have policies and procedures that are very specific that says, this is how we define a supplier. This is when a supplier is real. This is when they are not real. This is how we define the relationships between suppliers, right? Where you have very, very specific policies and procedures that are defined in a data governance program for definitions, structures, quality expectations, quality rules when applied to those domains, right? So you would say, okay, here's Acme Incorporated and here's Acme LLC. Is that one thing or is that two things, right? Let's say that Acme is a supplier to in the automotive industry, and you're trying to understand, is this one thing or is that two things? Well, that decision is a governance decision, right? Based on how I define, from a uniqueness perspective, a supplier or a vendor. Those rules would be defined as a part of a data governance effort. If you determine that there are two records here when there really should just be one, and say, okay, well, they need to be merged together, again, that's a governance decision. Let's create a single version. Let's merge the records together. That requires having very, very specific rules for, again, uniqueness, quality, accuracy, even structure of a record. How many fields are expected to support a vendor or supplier record? So the creation of a master record is a function largely of policies and procedures that are defined by a data governance effort. Now, MDM software is where you would codify, where you configure those business rules, where you would manage many of those business rules. That's what MDM does, is it takes business rules that are defined by a governance program and allows you to configure them in a software so the software can automate the application of those business rules. This is why I often say you can do MDM without MDM software. Typically for most companies, it's difficult to do at scale. But if you only had 1,000 customers or 1,000 assets or 1,000 materials or 1,000 vendors, you could do MDM without MDM software. Not recommended for most companies because it's difficult to scale. So some of the things you talked about earlier, you talked about like Dun & Bradstreet. I used to work at Dun & Bradstreet for over 7 years. I know Dun & Bradstreet incredibly well. I know their data very, very well. I would argue what they're trying to do is create a reference data set for information about companies, where everybody agrees that this is how a company is defined through the lens of what they call the Duns number. But this is how a company is defined. Here are the quality standards, right? Here's the structure of the record. Here's the fields that are to be expected. Here's the character types, all sorts of business rules, where it's a one size fits all, right? D&B, Dun & Bradstreet, is defining the governance policies. They define what a Duns number is. They define what it isn't. They define the quality expectations. They're defining those governance rules. And then you have to determine whether those rules work for you or not. It's the same thing in any sort of data consortium, right? Are the rules going to work for me or are they not going to work for me? The problem you always hear with Dun & Bradstreet, the concern is that, well, their data is incorrect. Well, through their lens, it isn't. Through their policies, through their procedures, through their rules, it's not incorrect. They think it's correct. But what we see is companies have different rules or different expectations or different policies. Often those policies are just not defined. Somebody in a sales role will say, well, that information is incorrect. That means that the D&B's data is incorrect. When in reality, chances are it's just a different perspective. It's a different view of that world. So creation of a gold master record is all about having defined governance policies and procedures and applying that information to data, right? To master data. I do draw a distinction between reference data and non-reference data, because reference data tends to be a little easier. And in the manufacturing space, if you generally agree on how to define an item or a part number for automotive, and you say, okay, we agree on this, these are the definitions, and everybody agrees, actually multiple companies even agree on it, managing that as a master data source is arguably slightly a little easier than it is to do it on your own. This is another benefit of using a third-party data source like a Dun & Bradstreet, in that you don't have to define those rules. Dun & Bradstreet is defining them. You just have to define whether they work for you or not, right? So,
but
go ahead.
Malcolm, is Profisee capable to enable or allow the definition of such rules? Yeah? Is Profisee a technology which supports the definition of a golden record rule?
Yes.
And you
Absolutely.
can define, you as a customer of Profisee can define the data sources and the rules you would like to apply to the data source.
Exactly right. Yes,
And
all MDM platforms work that way. That is a core. What you just defined as a core capability of all MDM platforms.
But I go one step further, if I may. Yeah,
please.
I differentiate between the. Sorry for saying that. Maybe it's not diverse enough. Between the father data source and the mother data source. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So take it this way. There are entities who are really the source of the data. Yeah, the source. Like the very much in regulation organizations. Yeah.
Yes.
So the state defines the ID of your company. Okay. In France, it's the Sirène, Siret. In Italy, it's another, or it's an official organization, like in Germany.
Sure. In the UK, there's Companies House.
It's an ID. So first, to identify an entity is there are certain identifications. Yeah.
Sure.
Who represent a certain presentation of an entity. When I'm now on supplier or customer, if I take business partner as one example.
Yes, that's a great one, by the way. And that's an SAP designation.
So, object business partner could be very simple. Could be a customer or supplier. Yeah? Very simple. Yeah. And then you have certain IDs who help you to identify, is this representation of that object real? Yeah? It is.
Yes.
It is a regulated ID. It is maybe a tax ID. Yeah. Maybe it's even the DUNS number. Additionally, you have a portfolio of certain IDs. You validate them. You have a scoring. And so on. So forth. The legal form, for example, you have to differentiate between a legal entity and a natural person. We know that.
So let's talk about that. So I assume when you say father, that's what you mean by the legal source, right? Like maybe in the case of the UK, it's Companies House. Go ahead.
So just an example. When I take the business partner data record, of the SAP Business Network Service, which was called before Ariba Network. Okay, maybe Maybe you heard about it. If you take that record, it has 560 attributes. 560. It's more than name, address, zip code, blah, blah, blah. 560.
That's too much.
So now what I did, I defined for each attribute the real source of the data. The real source of the data. So now, normally, you can talk to any of your clients. You can separate, maybe I take SAP for an example. SAP needs 250,000 objects to function. 250,000, okay? Just from a dimension perspective.
That doesn't sound complex at all.
100,000 they create by themselves. So they are the source of the object data, like the product. The product
Sure.
has a material number.
As a part of some sort of predefined data model.
Yeah, exactly. 150,000 are lended from others, from others. Yeah.
Right.
So now, when I define a golden record process, I need the combination. As you said, I define for me my record with the attributes, number one, and that's individual by client. Okay. But then I separate that. Is this data coming from yourself? Are you the owner of the name? Are you the owner of the legal form? Are you the owner? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then comes now the technology. I'm looking for a technology where you can combine the accessibility to the real father system of the data source. Yeah. And if you have that, and then you have the rules to combine it, and this is beyond an intranet, It's clear. Yeah. And then you define the rule and you can configure that. I can assume in Profisee you can configure such rules. Yeah.
Indeed.
And then you get some probability. You can say, okay, if it's 85% or better, then I take it automatically. If not, I have a workflow. Somebody looks on the data and blah, blah, blah. You know all that. Yeah. So therefore, the golden record, this was my vision. And maybe, I don't know if Profisee is having this or envision that. Profisee is for me a solution in between Microsoft Purview and SQL Server technology, leveraging Microsoft Data Factory deployment with Power BI, tralala. Yeah. So now comes Purview. Is it right? Visionary, Malcolm. Visionary. Is it right that you say, okay, you are the client? You have an access capability to father systems, not solely by the company Profisee, leveraging the access capabilities of additional Microsoft technologies. Yeah. So I have that access capability, the portfolio, and I can configure as needed. Is this something you could envision, or do you deploy that? What I just say, the separation of the mother system is always the system you use inside the company to store data. This I understand. This is the go-to place. Yeah. This is the place where you govern the data and distribute the data to other operation systems, whatever they are, in your company intranet environment. Yeah. But the question for me is that's for me interesting. Yeah. If you are capable to do it, or if you envision to do it.
Absolutely capable. At this point, I would recommend, Stefan, we connect offline. I see a question from Jeff in the chat. Jeff, hold tight. We'll get to you. Absolutely can support what you're talking about. One thing that I would kind of just throw out there, kind of getting back to the metaphor of the father and the mother, there can be many fathers, and they can all be right. So an example would be you mentioned tax IDs. Well, the notion of a tax ID aligns well to more legal or finance or compliance or audit definitions of a business partner, but it may not actually well align to the notion of a marketing partner or somebody in marketing. Somebody in marketing may want to define a business entity completely differently than the way a tax ID defines them. And by the way, most countries, tax ID is not unique. You can have a given corporate entity with multiple tax IDs, multiple, right? So tax IDs in and of itself as a unique identifier are not very good. So I used to hear this all the time when I was at Gartner. It's like, oh, well, our CFO says is that we just have to defer to tax ID. Tax ID is the master ID, and we'll just use the tax ID. Well, for the marketing department, that's not going to work. Generally, is not going to work. It may not even work for shipping or logistics, where you have to ship something to it.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. It is. So there can be many fathers here. To the question about, let's get to your second question here quickly, because I do see that we have other questions. How fast does it take to deploy? Now, the fact you're using the phrase master record, a gold master record, suggests to me that your question is being asked within the context of what we would say operational MDM, meaning you create a master record in a data hub, in an MDM hub, and then you push that somewhere. You push that into a CRM system. You push it into some other table in SAP. It is used, that business partner, to use SAP language. By the way, if you guys are out there and you're hearing business partner, this is how SAP defines the combination or an entity that would otherwise be called customer or vendor or supplier. It's just a business entity. It's a corporate entity. It's a business partner. And in S/4HANA, the newer versions of SAP, they use a single table to represent a business entity instead of a customer table, supplier table, vendor table. It's just one big table that munges all those things together. But anyway, to deploy an MDM, could you deploy at a large enterprise? Could you deploy an operational MDM where you create a single version of the truth and push it into consuming systems? Could you do that in 3 months? No way. No way. You're not going to. Now, if you go and talk to MDM providers, if you talk to vendors, if you look at websites, what you will see is, yes, you can be up and running in 6 to 8 weeks. You absolutely can if you are more focused on limited scope, and if you're focused on what we would call an analytical style of MDM, where all you're trying to do is link things together, right? Entity 1, Entity 2, Entity 3, Entity 4, are these one thing, or is that 3 things or 4 things, right? Can you just link everything together, match everything up under one common ID, and then use that ID for accurate aggregated reporting in downstream BI systems? That you can deploy in weeks, not months, if you have those business rules defined. Now, that's the hardest part for most companies, is to define those business rules. How do I define a unique corporate entity? If you can define those business rules, or maybe even defer to a third party like I've done in Bradstreet, that makes it a little easier, at least to get off the ground, you can be up and running in weeks. But what you just described, Stefan, particularly in the manufacturing space, when I talk to manufacturing clients and they say MDM, it's almost always operational, meaning that data is being used to fuel logistics processes or procurement processes or other manufacturing processes that require precision, that require a single version. For operational styles of MDM, what you're probably talking a year plus, right? And I know that sounds bad, but you're talking generally about replacing the wing of a flying plane, right? Where you are talking about changing how you operate, maybe changing how you onboard new suppliers or vendors, or changing your manufacturing process to integrate the data coming from an MDM hub. On average, we know, on average, across all MDM deployments, all vendors, all deployments, all companies, the average length of implementation is around 9 months, where the majority are those analytical styles that are being done in 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So operational styles of MDM can be very, very time intensive. They can be disruptive, but they can drive a lot of value. So there is a trade-off here between time to market, right? Time to get the solution running, and the overall value that can be delivered here. So there's a balance. But Stefan, I would love to continue the conversation. It seems like you've got great questions here. How about if you're able to stay till the top of the hour, if you're able to stay for another half hour, let me answer any additional questions that come up, and then if I'm still free towards the end of the hour, we can come back. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's perfect. So I am leaving the stage, yeah, and then you ping me, and then we continue.
Sehr gut. All right, that was fun. I love those questions around customer related data or supplier related data and single versions of the truth, because the fact is, guys, is that there is no real kind of single version of the truth anymore, right? If you want to talk about data fabrics or data mesh, you want to talk about what Gartner calls adaptive data governance. The truth is that context matters, right? And you can have a customer record that is functionally different for a marketing use case than it is for a legal or compliance use case. And those things are okay. You can do that. But at a higher level, chances are you're going to need to have a single definition, single quality standards, because if your CEO asks, how many customers do we have? There really can only be one answer. So it's a balancing act. Jeff, what are some of the features that people expect MDM platforms to be capable of, which aren't MDM platform responsibilities or are better served by a functionality of a different platform? Awesome question. I love this one because honestly, kind of the boundary of MDM, right? Like, so if we just drew a circle and said, this is MDM, and then we drew in other circles, like if we were kind of drawing a data management Venn diagram, and maybe an MDM is the middle circle, and then other circles could be maybe data quality, analytics, maybe even data science. Some of those areas are starting to overlap. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing MDM vendors increasingly kind of flirt with other capabilities and pulling some of those into their platforms because you can drive a ton of insight when you do that. Now, I would think that kind of the number one answer to your question here, Jeff, is, well, first of all, what are MDM capabilities? Now, sadly, I'm going to put on my Gartner hat because I was a Gartner analyst for almost 3 years. And I wrote the kind of the operating manual here. It's called the Gartner Critical Capabilities document for MDM. And it's got 13 capabilities. And this is what these are the capabilities you have to be an MDM provider. Some of those key capabilities we can go into more detail here. It's integration, it's workflow, it's data quality, it's data governance. Those are some of the big ones. I don't want to kind of spew out, for the next half hour, what are critical capabilities. I would kind of invite you to check out a document, invite you to check out additional resources we have on Profisee.com as well. But to answer your question, I think number one is what I would just kind of call advanced analytics. and what I will throw into that bucket is the use of graph and increasingly ML, machine learning. You could throw in a little bit of AI, but I know there are purists out there that get wound up when people commingle AI and ML, and it makes it sound like we don't know what we're talking about. I hope I know what I'm talking about. I would just say kind of graph and ML functionalities are increasingly being brought into MDM platforms because there can be a lot of value there. Meaning you can run graph-based processes to understand relationships that exist within data that you wouldn't have otherwise known about, right? Where you could, in theory, the example I always gave when I was at Gartner, and I will continue to give, is you could infer or derive a family relationship. Let's just say you've got 2 customer records. You don't even think they're any related at all because they're different addresses and they're maybe even different names. I live in a blended family where there are multiple names in my house. But you could run a graph to understand that there is maybe a family relationship there. That could be highly useful and highly insightful to a marketer, right? Because you can action that. You could actually even take that and start managing that as a master data relationship. You could start applying governance rules to it and managing it as master data. However, there's a catch, right? The catch here is that to derive those insights, generally you're talking about having access to large troves of transactional data that arguably do not belong in an MDM hub. So to answer your question, what we're seeing is more and more kind of vendors flirting with pulling some of those capabilities, particularly graph-based analytics, that really work well for kind of traditional hierarchies. But when you start talking about inferring or deriving, like doing more data science-y type stuff with unknown unknowns, if you start pulling that transactional data into an MDM hub, you could create a lot of bloat. The system's going to slow down. Arguably not the best place for a lot of that data, because typically you see MDM data being managed in more relational forms, rows and columns, right? And where that other data is not, because there's so much of it. But I would say kind of BI and analytics, advanced analytics is happening kind of at the periphery of MDM. And I would argue that's where it belongs. But the question then becomes, how do you kind of integrate those two together? How do you pull an MDM program and have it coexist happily next to maybe a data science platform or data science organization? So I'm commingling technologies and people here, but have those things a little more tightly integrated than they otherwise would have been, because you could start managing some of those insights as master data and applying more traditional governance rules to them. So there's some cool stuff there. I actually wrote several pieces at Gartner related to this, what I would kind of loosely call augmented MDM. That's one of the areas. To answer your question, that's probably the biggest area where MDM is kind of like, is kind of, there's blurring overlap there. I would say, increasingly data quality and integration are two other areas that are kind of bleeding into MDM. So what you see is MDM providers there's kind of a fork in the road with MDM, where some providers are trying to be all things to all people, meaning, and what do I mean by things? So this last year, Gartner introduced to the market something they're calling the Data and Analytics Governance Platform, which is basically this Swiss Army knife of data management capabilities that can do everything, right? It can do MDM, it can do governance, integration, metadata management, lineage, profiling, discovery, like everything. It's a Swiss Army knife. And Gartner said, okay, this exists as a real thing, although we don't really kind of know yet. It's too early. It's very, very immature. This market will shake out. There are some MDM providers that are kind of racing towards that, the Data and Analytics Governance Platform, and to be more of a Swiss Army knife, right? So what you see is some MDM providers investing in data quality, investing in data integration platforms. Some of the MDM providers, like an Informatica or an IBM or even SAP, are kind of already there because they have those tools in their tool chest, right? Informatica's got all these tools already. We could have an interesting academic conversation about how well they are integrated across each other and how easy it is to implement those solutions in a more of a holistic data management approach. But you do see some MDM providers racing towards that notion as well. We at Profisee are not. We are trying to be best of breed MDM. That's all we want to be, the best at MDM, and we will let others like Microsoft and their Purview solution do metadata management. We will let others do data quality and do data integration, but still having some of those capabilities within MDM, because you need to, right? You need to be able to define some governance rules. You need to be able to apply some data quality processes in an MDM workflow. Great example is entity resolution, aka matching. So that's a long answer to a short question. You're seeing kind of a fork in the road in the MDM space. Some providers are trying to become more of a Swiss Army knife. Some providers like us are trying to be kind of the best at MDM and double down on core capabilities. Could you get a hold of the critical capabilities document? Well, that's behind Gartner's paywall. They will happily give that to you for a price. That's a good topic for me to cover, though, maybe on a future, maybe a blog post or what we call MDM Bites, which is some of the videos that I post on Profisee.com. I could certainly talk to that, right, without breaking any overt copyright laws. I would believe. So, yeah, let me do that. Let me take that, Jeff, as a follow up, because I think that would be useful for a lot of our viewers, just to kind of understand what are the core capabilities that define MDM. Common question that I get around platform functionality: can it do reporting analytics? No, and I wouldn't expect it to. Leave reporting and analytics to the clicks and tableaus and bursts and business objects and Synapse. There's 1,000 of them out there. MDMs are not about reporting and analytics. They provide the keys. They're in essence, MDM can act as basically a key registry to allow you to link Acme, Acme Inc., Acme Co., Acme and Sons, the 4 different versions of Acme that you have maybe in your CRM system. MDM is very good at saying, okay, here's a new ID that will allow you to link those things together so that when you do a roll up in your reporting platform, you can get a kind of a single view of the customer. But I would not expect MDM to be a reporting hub. It's not what it's built for at all. So if you're talking to vendors, or they're saying, yeah, you can do MDM analytics, or you can do analytics out of an MDM, red flag. It's not designed for that. Now, there is some basic reporting capability in MDM platforms, but generally the reporting that you get is more from an administrative kind of lens, right? Like how many new records were added, how long did it take to to steward those records. There's reporting related to the workflow capabilities, like stewardship and how fast are records moving through the system or being processed through the system. But it's really about the administration of MDM processes. It's not just kind of general analytics platform. That's a yellow flag there on analytics. Don't expect an MDM platform to be an analytics platform because that's not what they're designed for. Sincere thanks. Awesome. You're welcome. Sincere, you're welcome. Sincere, you're welcome. I'm glad you guys are here. I am seeing others. Aladdin, Preeti, Bethany. Not trying to put anybody on the spot, but if anybody does have any questions here, would love to answer some additional questions. Because I got a feeling that if I go back to Stefan, we'll fall right back down a rabbit hole and we could consume a lot of time. That wouldn't be bad. Obviously, I'm passionate about this stuff, but if others have questions here, would love to hear them. Oh, Preeti's with Goldcast. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here, Preeti. But something Q&A. Oh, thanks, Jeff. Hold on. There we go. Sorry, I was looking. There's a tab for video Q&A and text Q&A. I was stuck on video because I went over to. Oh my goodness, hold on. I'm gonna look closely here. We're due to begin a POV in the next few weeks. What's the one thing you'd recommend that we do to prepare? Oh, Bethany, great question. So, I assume you're talking about a POV of an MDM solution. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that. Great question. And then another one is, how important is it to have data stewards assigned prior to implementation, or if we just assign that as we go? So let's go back to question number one. What's important from a proof of value? And I love the notion of proof of value. It's something that Profisee kind of says instead of just a proof of concept. Because it's driving value for MDM is the most critical thing, and it's the thing that I see companies not focus on enough. What's important to get right from a proof of value perspective? Well, there's a lot of different answers here. I think what I would do, one is to acknowledge that a lot of the business rules that are going to be used will likely be a little more generic, right? When you're implementing MDM, what you will need to do is to define business rules related to quality. I was talking about entity resolution, matching rules. You will have to define other rules for, structure of a customer record and supplier record. One thing you'll need to know here is that as a proof of value or proof of concept, a lot of those rules will kind of come predefined. Right. And just kind of keep that in mind. The best thing that I would do is try to align the POV as closely to a real use case that you can. Meaning, can you use the POV or POC as a kind of a beta test for some sort of business case? Right. I would align the proof of value to a real pain point that you have, right? That somebody in the organization has. Chances are pretty good, Bethany, that in your sales organization, maybe, I'm just guessing, I don't know, but I see this all the time, but that maybe your sales organization is struggling with a single view of the customer, right? Or maybe your supply chain organization is struggling with a single view of a supplier, right? And notice I keep saying single view, because analytical styles of MDM, where all you're trying to do is to create a single kind of Goldmaster stub and then link all of the kind of versions of Acme Incorporated to that one master record so that you can have a single view of your relationship with Acme Incorporated. That's a great approach for a POV. It's generally like 95% of the time, that's what you're going to see in a POV is an analytical style of MDM. But can you align that to a real pain point in the organization? Meaning don't make your POV an academic exercise that doesn't really matter to anybody, right? Try to have it matter to somebody in the organization. Maybe sales is struggling with a single view of the customer. Maybe it's as simple as you've got customer records in your CRM that don't fully align to customer records in your ERP, right? And could you use a POV as a limited scope beta test at solving that one problem, right? Where CRM not tied to ERP. See this all the time. Or maybe you key in ERP IDs into a CRM system. I'm spitballing here, Bethany. guessing, but can you make the POV as close aligned to a real problem that you have in the organization, where you could, in theory, knock, knock, use that to help build a business case? Right now, in a POV, you're not going to break every silo, right? You're not going to solve for all use cases. You're not going to implement an operational style of MDM. There are a lot of things that you're not going to do, but what you can do is to have that, it provides some insights that could be very, very, very useful to build a business case, to tell the organization something to the effect of, hey, we took 10,000 records out of the CRM and we took 10,000 records out of the ERP. We thought we had, 10,000 customers. Lo and behold, what we have is probably something closer to 8,000, maybe, right? And by the way, we were able to show, here's another example of a POV, where customer A also showed up in line of business B. So customer A, we thought was only doing business in this one line of business, but they're doing business in multiple lines of business. So maybe instead of the use case here, instead of CRM and ERP, maybe it's just CRM1, CRM2, CRM3, or ERP1, ERP2, ERP3, and breaking a limited number of silos, but where you're able to tell the business something that they didn't otherwise know, right? The use case that I just described would be a cross-selling use case, where you think that these customers are highly siloed, but lo and behold, you do this POV and you show that they're not. If you can, in a POV, take a report to somebody in sales or somebody in procurement or somebody with a relatively big title and show them something that they didn't otherwise know that is valuable. Oh man, there's a cross-sell opportunity here I didn't know about. I'd love to see more of that. That's what you're going for, right? That's really what you're going for here, is a little bit of wow factor with the business, instead of okay, right? Can we do MDM? Can we use it to do stewardship? Or can we, you get my point here. Try to find a way to wow the business. Next question. How important is it to have data stewards assigned prior to implementation, or can we assign as we go? It's pretty important to try to have them assigned prior to implementation, because in a perfect world, I know this is, the world isn't perfect. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had a hurricane last week. But in a perfect world, you would have them assigned prior, because in a perfect world, they would be involved in the vendor evaluation, right? They'd actually be involved in maybe even doing some scoring exercises as a part of some sort of kind of RFP type exercise. So the better you can have them engaged, or the sooner you can have them engaged, the better, because not only would they, in theory, be involved in the vendor evaluation and doing some limited scope testing, they would be involved in that POV as well, by the way. You can actually have them start engaging from the perspective of providing requirements vis-a-vis governance policies, right? You can have them involved in the POV where they can actually see and help you make some decisions as a part of the POV as to when Acme Inc. and Acme Co. are maybe one thing or two things, right? So the sooner you have data stewards, and this is just a general rule of thumb, right? The sooner you can have people who are impacted by the software you're evaluating involved in the evaluation, selection, implementation of that software, the better you're going to be. Now, I'm a pragmatist as well, and I've been in your position. I've implemented MDM solutions. I've implemented an MDM where I couldn't get money for data stewards, and I still went forward anyway, because 70% or 80% of the solution is better than 0% of the solution. So trust me, if you're struggling here, right? If you're struggling with sales, not wanting to pony up resources to help, or maybe you're struggling with finance doing the same, or for whatever reason, maybe you're struggling, or maybe others that are on the call today are struggling with getting stewards, and you said, okay, well, Malcolm said that it's better to have them engaged. So now I have a dependency, and I've got to get those stewards engaged. I've got to get time allocated. I've got to get their senior leaders aligned to 25 or 30% of their time working on data stewardship tasks, because Malcolm said that's the best thing to do, and it is the best thing to do. But if that's a hard dependency that's going to slow you down and stop you from being able to do the POV and stop you from from implementing MDM and driving value with MDM, I would take 70 or 80% of the solution versus over 100% of the solution every day, or 0% of the solution, I should say. Pardon me. I'd take 70 or 80 over 0 every day, right? So going to be a fine line there. There's going to be a fine balance, but all else being equal, have them before. You can assign as you go. You can do that. It's going to increase your risk. But if you do that POV the right way, right? If you get somebody on the business side excited about it, chances are much greater that they get excited about being involved. All right, hopping back to the chat. Stefan, can you come back? Yes, you can come back. Sorry if I didn't answer that quickly. You asked 9 minutes ago. Ben telling me that Bethany had questions that I was ignoring. My apologies, Bethany. I hope you're still here. Yes, the platform says you're still here. Hopefully you got that. From Jeff's perspective, stewards would be very helpful in UAT. Couldn't agree more. I mean, sign off UAT. You want those stewards involved. Totally agree, Jeff. Owners are also helpful to ensure engagement and support from executive. Yep, totally agree. You don't want to be making business side data decisions in your own silo. Man, I learned that the hard way. Meaning, like, if you don't have the business engagement, the first 3 or 4 times I tried to do MDM, massive failures. just massive failures. I could go into details, but the first time the massive failure was a result of guessing at business requirements, was a result of kind of guessing, where I didn't have engagement. I didn't have stakeholder alignment. I was given an edict from a CEO to solve for how many customers do we have, and the business didn't think that there was a problem. And I barreled forward and I deployed a solution, and it actually worked. For the most part, it worked. But yeah, it ended up failing because we didn't have that engagement and because we had defined a bunch of business rules that didn't make any sense. To make a long story short, I was doing an operational style of that MDM that Stefan and I were talking about earlier. In retrospect, I would never try to do that again as a phase 1 ever. Operational styles of MDM are complex and disruptive, can drive incredible value, but they can be disruptive, and you need deep business engagement if you're going to be embarking on operational MDM. But I didn't have it, but I barreled forward because that's what I do. I push forward, and the rules that I used to define a customer record, I thought they were brilliant. Like I thought they were just like brilliant, right? We had these like relatively complex, like cascade of business rules, right? Like source, we considered the source. Where did it come from? Did it come from CRM, ERP, external data, some other source? We considered like things like last update date. We even considered like who was doing the update, whether it was somebody in finance versus somebody in marketing who was doing the update. And we created this set of business rules for that customer master, right? That I thought was just like the most brilliant thing ever. And we did it at a field level. And so not only were we evaluating, records at, in their totality, like at an object level, but we were evaluating individual fields of data. Run it through MDM. It's like, oh, this is fantastic. I didn't have business engagement, so I didn't really kind of know whether things were right or whether they were wrong. I kind of assumed that they were because smartest guys in the company, right? At least I thought I was. I was not. But what we ended up creating from a Gold Master record perspective was what I have called ever since then the Franken record, a record that couldn't exist in real time and space, because we had this mishmash of like bill to and ship to and all this other stuff. So like we'd have a company name that was okay, that's valid, but then we'd have an address of like a partner address or some loading bay address or some address that could never be associated to the company name, like ever, right? Because we were doing all these evaluations, these complex business rules, and they were applied to field records. So we were kind of creating these, this master record with fields that were coming from all over the place, and it was just. But that guys, like that was weeks of development, right? It was weeks, and it was all wrong. So Jeff, couldn't agree more. Don't make your own decisions. Don't if you're in IT, don't think that you know how to create a customer record, because you don't. Defer to the people who manage that stuff day in and day out. Yeah, I've learned a lot of things in the MDM space through the school of hard knocks, sadly. All right, there's 5 minutes left. Let me see if Stefan came back. I see you on the bridge, Stefan. If you want to jump back on video, there you are. He's back. All right, you get the last 6 minutes.
Technology works.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, perfect. Maybe two little remarks. Yeah?
Okay.
The one, maybe the first is a little bit bold. Yeah,
I like bold.
Yeah. For us, or for me, there is always only one father for a data. And if there is not one father, we will make sure that there is only one father.
Okay. And that may work, and that may be okay. I've talked.
You're right.
Many...
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It is then a decision and a definition process to secure that there's only one father. First statement.
That can be very, very valid. That if you get everybody to agree, then you're good. So you've got a definitive source. You've got an authoritative source. 10-4. You're
and material. Yeah, material has a lot of different material numbers. We all know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a definition topic. If nothing exists as a standardization scheme, you define your own standards.
Yep.
Okay.
And if you're talking about a material, the piece that goes into an automotive, you need a single source of truth. You don't need anybody defining my own bolt or my own nut or my own brake pad. Get it?
And you know why? I'm not in the analytics world, but the automotive industry, I would even say the global automotive industry, is converting into a network of networks of the full digital economy.
Oh,
if you are in the full digital economy, yeah, and what does it really mean? A human being design a car in a virtual world. He develops the car in a digital world. He produces the car. He tests the car in a fully digital world. And at the end, he converts this whole virtual world into reality. Okay. So therefore,
awesome.
Therefore, the master of data transportation is not the human being anymore. It's the systems. So the systems is not responsible to carry on data from A to B. The human being is the master in defining the rules of automation of master data. So now, park that. Next topic. You mentioned your graph.
Yeah.
So what I defined with some architects from BMW is the following. So we cannot stay in master data management on syntactical level. Every data is stored in a certain data field, has a certain length, and so on and so forth. And the syntax of data structures have a certain hierarchy, and each field has a name. Maybe you have the one guys have endless strings, the others have limited strings, it's all over the place. But that's not enough. Yeah? We have to be more carefully about the content is in the field. So therefore, we have technologies who can manage the transport of data, not knowing what's the data really means. Yeah, that's a reality. So therefore, we developed a semantic layer. What you really have to understand are the semantics. So what the meaning is of the content of each field.
Yeah.
Now you have to build up the relationships between that. And what are the objects? That's the human being. That's the business partner objects. That's the contract. That's the material. That's the country. You name it. Yeah, you name it. That's a gate. Yeah, at a plant. It's a storage location. It is all over the place. The objects are not limited to legal objects. The object is a variety of a portfolio. It's like a bunch of flowers. Yeah. Now the semantics, the knowledge graph technology, ISO standards, industry standards 4.0, what we now do, Malcolm and colleagues on the phone, we have to uplift the intercommunication of objects on a semantic layer, and we decided we go OWL. Because on OWL, you can combine objects based on semantics between each other, not limited, and this was your point, Malcolm, you mentioned, not limited only to master data objects. So therefore, if you want to what we all want to do, out of my perspective, we want to semi-automate the task of master data management to the max. Okay?
Yep.
Get the stuff off the table of human beings wherever they are on that planet. Yeah.
Yep.
Nestle, for example, has 500 guys in Brazil. SAP has 600 guys in Manila. It's all over the place. Other guys have somebody in South Africa, yeah, who are day in, day out, yeah, and managing to keep the master data accurate.
Yep.
But this is not a good idea. It's not a solution which fits anymore in the world of the digital economy.
I agree. If you're talking about, and by the way, we are at the top of the hour, so we should probably end fairly soon. I don't know if you can tell on your side, but I'm sharing a graphic on the screen, a graphic for something that is called the data fabric. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. In a world of an interconnected network of data providers and data consumers, couldn't agree more. This notion of a semantic layer, where I would argue that MDM capabilities can live, right? Is MDM enough in that world that you described?
No, it's not. It's
right.
Not.
I agree. By the way, I agree. And the people who are the authors behind this notion of a data fabric would agree with you. What you're talking about, though, is technology that is probably 5+ years away from mainstream. I am excited about the notion of highly interconnected data networks and sharing of data. It's not widely done right now. It's done on certain use cases in certain silos, right? Within procurement and supply chain, there's a few data, there's some sharing that is happening there. There's some sharing that is happening from a materials perspective in the automotive space, and some commonality around reference data there. But a world you just described of deeply interconnected on a global basis across manufacturers, across suppliers, totally and completely agree with you. Legacy MDM that exists within one corporate silo with very specific rules for that one company, that's not enough. I would argue that there are vendors out there that are selling this. I mean, SAP is talking about this future world. There are others that are talking about this future world. We're talking about it, but we're a long way from what you just described, Stefan. I mean, that semantic layer, it exists in little pieces, but not at a deeply interconnected way to MDM, a deeply connected way to data integration platforms, a deeply integrated way to metadata management platforms, because it's not just MDM, it's all data. To your point about the however many fields there are in SAP. So yes, I would invite you to research and do some Google around this, what's called the data fabric. I think there's something there. I think it's real, but we're talking years down the road, because that semantic layer, to do what you described, it has to do not only semantics and managing a semantics, but it would have to manage governance rules as well, that we were also talking about. Because to your point, you can't let the machines do everything. There has to be some human oversight and some management here as well. Right. So for humans to configure some of those rules vis-a-vis ontologies and hierarchies and other governance policies and procedures. So the world you talked about, I would invite you to check out the data fabric. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not. Malcolm.Hawker, you see my name here, Malcolm.Hawker@Profisee.com. Happy to connect offline. Happy to connect with everybody that was here as well.
I will ping you on that. Maybe we can exchange a little bit. I also have connections to the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Berlin. Yeah, Hasso founded this with a bridge to the Stanford University. Yeah. So if you're interested, then I would love to stay in touch also
Let's
outside
do
of
that.
that. Maybe we can exchange some thoughts, and maybe we can learn from each other.
Would love it. Jeff, Bethany, Stefan, others, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for their time. Happy Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we will see you 1 month from now at the next edition